So, welcome to another edition of the Influence Global podcast, and I'm delighted to be joined by a very special guest all the way from Los Angeles in America today, no other than Regi, who is the CEO and founder of Black Dot, which is a influencer-driven digital studio. So, welcome, Regi, to the show.
Thanks for having me, Gordon. It's great to be with you today.
So, tell us a little bit more about what you guys do.
Yeah, Three Black Dot is it's an entertainment company. What we really focus on, how do we create experiences and content that really speak to the heart of the modern gamer. And so we've put together what I would say is sort of a future studio model, but it's certainly a very kind of unique infrastructure where we bring a lot of creative resources to the creator economy to produce original films, series, books, clothing, merchandise, which sort of all at the core kind of wraps around connecting very deeply to a digital community and connecting that community to IP and experiences that resonate. And I think that's where the that's where the influencer bit comes in.
Yeah, no, that's great. I mean, gaming has just grown hugely, hasn't it, over the last last year or so? And why particularly esports? Why has there been this growth in this market, other than perhaps just the pandemic? What particularly have you been noticing?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing I think that's fueling the growth is just the generational shift in attitudes around gaming. And so, if we were to give some context to this, gaming now is probably $130 billion industry. It's the largest sort of form of media entertainment in the world. The esports piece of it that you touched on is fastly growing, but it's still only kind of 1 to 2% of that overall pie. But to answer your question specifically, it's the attitudinal shift that we've seen amongst especially Gen Z and millennials, where gaming is their predominant form of entertainment. There was a recent study that really caught my attention because I was even shocked. Even someone who understands how quickly this is growing, I was shocked by the numbers that showed 26% of Gen Z and millennials say that gaming is their preferred form of entertainment.
Wow.
Movies and television, only 10%. And so really this is where the audience has gone. And I think there's lots of different reasons for that, but they've spoken loudly that if you don't understand gaming, you don't understand the sort of attitudes and the profiles that are being shaped and influenced by this form of entertainment, you're really missing out on a very sort of large piece of the market and addressable audience.
Yeah, when you said generational thing, I mean, sometimes when we think about gamers, we think of slightly nerd-orientated people that just never leave their darkened rooms and play on these gaming wheels and everything else. And yet actually, I mean, dare I say, I play Candy Crush every day. That's a game, isn't it? I mean, what do we define as gaming? Is it how broad is it? Because everybody now is, particularly during the pandemic, is playing some form of game. Where is that?
Yeah, I think that's the sort of advent of the sort of casual gamer is really a big part of the growth. And the way we tend to look at these things is on the spectrum of who would sort of define themselves as a gamer versus who would say, yeah, I play games occasionally. And sort of, if that's the continuum within that, there's lots of different profiles that sort of reveal very interesting kind of consumer behavior patterns and choices that allows you to, then get into a conversation about reaching that audience and influence and marketing and conversion and sort of that whole spectrum. And so that's, we have to make sure that we're sort of teasing it out as, esports at the sort of core extreme end of, someone who is gaming with the intent of really scaling up and then being top, top 1% at that game, all the way to the Candy Crush and people were just sort of putting it on their phone and playing casually, intermittently.
But I guess it's a good point that you made there, because the casual gamer could get excited by the thrill of the competition and the aspirational, and then of course move into into other forms of more serious gaming, which of course is an interesting trend, I guess, as well, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. I think we, what we like to do is we sort of flip it on its head, where gaming to us, and just sits at a tier that's similar to TV and movies, right? It doesn't really tell you anything and unto itself, because it's that broad. It really is reached and penetrated sort of the sort of zeitgeist in that broad of a manner. And so what we like to do is to look at those consumer profiles and those behaviors and really start to understand why people are playing the game. And you touched on a very interesting point, which goes back to your first question of what's fueling the growth. For Gen Z and millennials, when we start to sort of dig into those profiles, a lot of it really is about community building. A lot of it, sometimes it's aspirational, sometimes it's a point of connectivity, sometimes it's a point of socialization, sometimes it's a sense of accomplishment. And so from an influence standpoint, you really need to dig in and try to understand kind of why that community is showing up there. And then that's really the key at you sort of unlocking the sort of way in, if you're an outsider trying to understand what this audience is doing and sort of how to reach them if they're not turning on the television anymore.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very interesting. When it comes to campaigns, then influencer marketing campaigns, what sort of the standout things that you've been noticing?
Yeah, I think for us, it's always about, especially when you're sort of playing in this digital space, it's always about how can you create things that have meaning and have impact. You can spend an enormous amount of money in digital marketing and sort of create these sort of short-term blips and lots of reach, but don't necessarily sort of do anything to move the needle towards affinity and resonance with a specific brand. And so what we do and what we think is really important, the sort of full stack of that of entry, is having a really, really good content experience. And so we try to wrap most of our campaigns into deep storytelling, and ideally a piece of IP that will gather persistent audience. And so a great example of this is a show that we did recently where we tapped, called Alpha Betas. And we tapped 4 massive gaming influencers who predominantly on YouTube, but collectively they had over 45 million subscribers.
Wow. And
we partnered with Starburns, it was the studio behind Rick and Morty, and we created a completely new animated series. And this was an entertainment experience that was crafted to specifically be geared towards the sentiment of the communities that these 4 massive influencers have been really programming to over the course of the last 4 or 5 years. What makes this interesting is we took a very sort of US heritage brand called Fruit of the Loom. Has been around for probably 100 years.
I know it very well.
And if you're of a certain age, through marketing, there's Fruit of the Loom and there's Hanes, and they major briefs, right? That brand, obviously, didn't have sort of a deep resonance within the sort of gaming community, especially these Gen Z millennial audiences. And we really sat and worked with them on a campaign of how to integrate them into alpha betas and integrate them into the storytelling that was really that would really allow them to show up in an authentic way as sort of being an outsider to this community. And they gave us license, thankfully, and they sort of listened to us to say, this community, there's a little bit of self-deprivation in this community. They're not coming here. The alpha betas community isn't about sort of bragging about how good you are and how great you are. You have to be willing to sort of make fun of yourself. And they allowed us to draw our characters in, sort of using Hanes briefs as a parachute and parachuting down from the sky. They allowed us to do kind of fun skits, fun kind of animated skits and drawn skits of your briefs being sort of exposed at an airport check-in, but in allowing us to sort of really weave them into the storytelling and weave them into sort of the emotional connectivity of the audience. The reception that they got was phenomenal. People were saying, oh, this is going to move Fruit of the Loom stock. I can't wait to go out and buy my Fruit of the Loom. It's because they haven't necessarily seen brands sort of come in as a part of the joke. And that was a part of the experience that we were able to craft for them, by virtue of sort of not just understanding who the influencers are, but really understanding why people are showing up and why they're participating in that community.
That's really interesting, because I'm guessing that you're having to bring the brand with you, and they've got to trust you, haven't they? Because there's so many big corporate organizations that know they should be doing something in influencer marketing, but that brand safety is they're on the touchline, aren't they? And they need to. But I love brands that do embrace this, and actually they let people run with it in a creative way, because it can break down that sort of stiff corporate imagery, isn't it? Sounds like you did a great job there.
Yeah, it's always fun when you get a partner that understands it a little bit. It does take a great deal of trust, because the first point of understanding is, hey, you understand this audience better than we do, so we're gonna like lean in on that. And for us as a studio that's putting together some of these content experiences, we have to then sort of show the same trust to our creative partners who are the influencers. Cool. And say, hey, this audience better than we do. Here are some of the brand guidelines, but tell us how you would feel most comfortable introducing this brand to your audience. And so it goes, it continues to go down the line. But I would say that everything in the digital space is one characteristic of it is you just can't control it. A lot of it is you get that instantaneous feedback. And if you're a brand and you're saying, that's what I want those likes, I want that engagement, I want to know that when I posted something or I showed up somewhere that it wasn't met with crickets, that people were really engaged with it and they responded. You can't control that. And so by virtue of making that statement and making that claim or that aspiration, you have to understand that sometimes it goes both ways, and the goal is sort of never 100%. You're never gonna no one's gonna be 100% happy with that. But in the instantaneous feedback, you certainly want a good ratio of 80% being happy with it amongst sort of 20% of people who are sort of trolls and they weren't gonna like it no matter what.
Yeah, but it's all feedback, isn't it? And it's understanding. It's being able to understand what your audience is saying. And what I loved about what you said, which I think is really important, is where content creators aren't just told what to do, but they're actually involved in the brief. Because I know from having spoken to many content creators over the years, they don't want to be the last thing in the food chain. They don't want to be the amplifier. There's a reason why the word creator is involved in their title, is so that they can be engaged in it. And I think so often you see brands look at the campaigns when they're finished and thinking, wow, we would never have gone in that direction. That's blown us away. And that's what's fantastic, isn't it?
Yeah, that's that's an incredible, experience when people come in with the right intention, and it goes really well. One of the things that we educate our partners on is these creators, they didn't, wake up and say, oh, I want to be an influencer, right?
Cool.
Sometimes that's the case when you're looking at different mediums, but for the most part, especially when you're looking at sort of longer form content, they've shown up and they said, I have a story to tell, and I think if I tell this story consistently enough, people will engage with me on the basis of me providing them an entertainment experience.
Mm.
And so you have to understand that if you're thinking about this just as like a sort of a dumb machine where you input something, and and then it spits out a list of people, and then you allocate a spend across that list of people, and on the output you get some creative assets. That's you're sort of, you can accomplish some goals that way, but I imagine that it's not the goals that you really aspire to, which is building resonance or building affinity amongst a community who may not have otherwise been interested in your product. And so, in partnership, and we really stress partnership with the brands that we work with, is, think of these creators as your partner as well, and allow them to really express the agency, because they're going to know this audience better than anyone. They've been able to, day in and day out, and the frequency is amazing, but they've been able to, day in and day out, show up in front of this group of people in a very intimate way. And there's like a scoreboard that measures it every single day.
Yeah.
And so you can see if it's, you can see the type of effect and impact that they're having, and how consistently people are showing up for them. Once they've been able to do that, they've earned the right to sort of trust them a little bit more than just be sort of at the end of some machine where you're pressing a button and spitting out something.
Mm. And they want the campaigns to work, don't they? That's the thing. And it's, it's if it falls flat for the brand, it falls flat for the content creator, and that's really important.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, the best campaigns are when the creator understands the why of the brand. And so, the more a brand can invest in, bringing them kind of over the wall and saying, like, here's why we find your audience valuable, and here's what we're really about, and here's what, here's how we think our product actually sort of completes the experience that you've been building. Creators love that, and they can help ideate, and they can just sort of be a part of the conversation in that way. And that's super important. I think anyone who is sort of missing that step and just sort of reducing everything to a set of numbers, you're sort of really only getting a fraction of the impact that you could be receiving.
Absolutely. So on the basis that we've been talking about content creators, who are some of the ones that are a shining light for you, and perhaps why?
Yeah, I think the creators that we work with the most, we have a foundation in gaming, and I think when we look at the sort of consistency of some of the gaming creators that we work with, and such as and these names may not be sort of household names, but if you ask your kids, if you're listening to this podcast, right, and you ask your kids about these, so creators like Slogo Man and Vanos Gaming, and Basically I Do Work, and Syndicate, and Wildcat. These are creators that, as I said, they have a certain almost directorial quality about them, and that they understand why people are showing up for them, and they really gear their content towards that in a very, very sort of professional, almost theatrical way. So nothing's haphazard. They have very, very specific point of views and they sort of reinforce those character traits to their audience, so that the audience, they're sort of never disappointed from like an emotional resonance standpoint. And so what I mean by that, if you have an audience that's sort of showing up for for comedic effect. So this is a channel that I go to whenever I've had a tough day and I just want to lean back and laugh. Really leaning into that and making sure that you're delivering that every single time is super important, and it's the fastest way to build an audience. I think my favorite creators that we work with, and even creators outside of that, such as a Mr. Beast, who's absolutely sort of crushing it in the digital space. They maintain that consistency, and you can tell they just get it. It's like a director who's able to shoot, let's say, a 15-hour movie or a 15-hour series, and they're able to sort of hold that thread the entire time, where everything feels like it's 15 hours of content, but everything feels like it has some continuity to it. And I think that's what the best digital creators are doing as well.
Yeah, and just to add to that, I'm guessing they know their numbers, don't they? I know that some of the top creators, they know about dwell time, they know about what time is working best, all of this sort of stuff. That they're really insightful, which always amazes me.
Obsessed. And so if you ever want to have a difficult conversation with a creator, a really good sort of professional creator, go to them and say that they need to change their posting time, or they need to change their posting schedule. And that's one of the most difficult conversations in all of entertainment, guaranteed.
Is it? because I'm assuming, though, because their audience are used to seeing uploads at 5 p.m. on a Wednesday or something, then they've positioned it in that way, which I think is brilliant, to be honest. I mean, I wish I was doing that. I tend to just post whenever, but there's no real. And then obviously, I'm not a big gaming creator, but there's a lot to be said for it, isn't it? About being consistent.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Have you noticed the quality as well? The quality of the content has got a lot better and more competitive.
Absolutely. I think the there's the sort of ecosystem, the digital ecosystem, as it gets kind of more advanced, if you will, people know where they go for a very specific effect. And then content creators also know which platforms give them very specific effects. And so if you're on YouTube, you have to have something to say. You need some production quality in terms of the way you edit and the pace, and how you open and how you close and what your middle segment is, and you really need to think as a almost as a programming exec would, or as a television exec would, in terms of really structuring a really tight 20 minutes or 25 minutes of content. If you're on Twitch, which is a live platform, you may have a runtime of 3 hours, 3 hours live, and you really need to know how you're going to fill that space over the course of 3 hours. And then you get to more of the sort of bite size, a TikTok, or even Instagram, where there's a format of, hey, I know I'm going to have someone's attention for 5 seconds, 10 seconds. What do I do? How do I fill it? And so the sort of best creators know, across those platforms, they know how they need to structure their content, and the value that they need to put in their content to really kind of win on those platforms.
I was going to say, and also the ads or the partnerships have got to feel that they're weaved in, as opposed to disrupt, because we know that a lot of Gen Z and millennials hate traditional advertising. It's the corporate big brands they don't like, do they? So it's trying to find, and that's why I think entertainment and comedy can work really well for brands, can't it?
Yeah, it's absolutely critical to just know and understand the way in. You know, I think especially Gen Z millennials, it's really a love hate with advertising. Um, when when you know, sort of done well, and the brand feels appropriate and feels like, you know, it belongs in the space, and you know, maybe the ad is next to a creator endorsement, there's a much higher level of tolerance for that sort of thing, especially if you're getting the content for free. There's almost like you know, there's an acceptance of, I know there needs to be some sort of value exchange with this creator. So I'm either going to um, I'm going to endure an ad, or, you know, sort of enjoy this ad. I'm going to just tip this creator and send them money via Patreon, or another platform where I'm going to pay them directly, but, you know, kind of when I feel like it. Um, or you know, in certain instances, I'm going to you know, participate in their merchandising program, or I'm going to you know, support you know, support some other initiative that they say is really important to them. So I think they're not, you know, Gen Z millennial, they're not adverse to the exchange of value. What they are adverse to is sort of being interrupted in a way that's you know, that feels discontinuous. You know, so
Absolutely.
when
I was going to say, a big ad in the front of a tournament would, that
right,
wasn't timely, could go down like a lead balloon.
right, like don't take me out of my element. You know, don't take me out of the context that I'm in. I think that's when brands can sort of run afoul of some of these communities.
Yeah. You mentioned merch a few minutes ago. It's an area that I'm very familiar with. What's the how much of these gamers are now are not just brand partnerships, but whether they be memberships or merch or other books or anything? How much has that grown in the last year or so?
Yeah, it's been it's been massive. So our you know, we from a, you know, I'll just say for us, I'll speak specifically for us. Our company, we stand up, you know, merchandise next to kind of our agency and our studio IP business. All three of those are sort of legs of the stool, and each of them are about sort of a third of our revenue makeup. And
Really?
just to
Wow.
sort of put some context around that, like we've, you know, from a publishing standpoint, we've sold over 15 million books. We have, you know, 9 shows in development at Hulu, Netflix, Sony, Snap. I'm just saying those stats to show that, you know, that's a big business for us. Merchandising is right there, and I think what we found is that people, especially Gen Z and millennials, they're very inclined to sort of, you know, what we like to call complete the experience. And so you sort of open up this emotional gap. You know, for us, it's always through content. We open up this emotional gap through 20-25 minutes of program content. And, you know, they say like, wow, that was really fun. That made me feel good. You know, that was a really, really good use of my time. Um, I want to share in and continue that experience. And you know, that sort of transition or that migration from watching a piece of content to buying a piece of merch is very, very natural. You know, for that generation, and I think they see merchandising as an expression of just personal taste and personal affinity. The merch sort of becomes the totems of the sort of cultural zeitgeist. And
Really?
so, you know, just as they're willing to sort of buy into, you know, the T-shirt by this sort of big brand, you know, a lot of them increasingly they'll buy the T-shirt from the big brand sort of secondhand, um, and be just as excited to engage in sort of the merchandising program of their favorite creator. And that's really just a attitudinal behavioral shift where, you know, previous generations, if you know, sort of the kind of brand meant anything, it meant everything. and you could lead with heritage, and you could lead with sort of provenance, and you can lead with sort of fabrication and all of these intricacies, and those were the sort of selling points. Whereas now it's more about how do I connect with you sort of through a content experience. And that's enough. If I feel like this content experience that you've developed, that's enough to sort of put you toe to toe with a big heritage brand, which is shocking. It's a shocking shift that sort of opens up a lot of different kind of infrastructure needs to really kind of service the sort of this creator economy that's emerging.
Yeah, no, it's great stuff. Well, Reggie, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you today. Really enjoyed this and hearing about
Yeah.
what's really going on the West Coast. So how can people find out more about you and contact you?
Yeah, absolutely. You should go to 3blackdot.com, or you can email us at info@3blackdot.com. That's our general mailbox. We will return. And I think in general we are we're crafting these entertainment experience with the goal of always creating a lasting impression on the consumer and audience. And we really enjoy partnering and working with brands and showing you the way in to Gen Z and millennial audiences that are otherwise very, very difficult to reach.
Yeah.
And so that's a part of the kind of the new infrastructure that we're building around the creator economy. But thanks for having me, Gordon. It's been a real pleasure.
No, pleasure to have you too. Thank you so much.